بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Sura Kahf explained, we have reached the story of Sayyidina Musa and al-Khadir. It's one of the really marvelous and mysterious stories of the Quran, a story that captures both attention and imagination. And each of the caves in the Quran, in Surah Al-Kahf, each of these stories is a cave, as we mention. Because each story contains within it a key to the protection and strengthening of our faith and certitude. So the story of Sayyidina Musa and al-Khadir alayhi salam contains within it the cave of knowledge and how one approaches the test of knowledge. We looked at the test of faith itself and certitude in the story of ashaab al-Kahf. And then we have the test of wealth and arrogance versus humility in the story of the people of the person who had the two gardens. In the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam with al-Khadir, we see the test of knowledge, and of consigning matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is of the more subtle stories in the Quran as well, right? And there are those, of course, who classically, there are some sects that took wrongful interpretations from the story of Musa and al-Khadir, which is not really the case in our times, that there is an outward knowledge of the Sharia, but there is also an inward knowledge of the Sharia that can be distinct from the outward knowledge. Whereas we recognize that there are inward meanings in the Quran and in the Sunnah, but the only inward meanings that are sound are those that firstly recognize the outward meanings, and secondly are connected with those outward meanings, right? So the context of the story is that Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was asked by some of his people, is there on earth anyone more knowledgeable than you? And Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam is not merely a prophet, right? He's not just a Nabi. He's not merely a messenger, right? He's not merely a Rasul. He is of the highest of the messengers, who are the ulul azm, the people of highest resolve amongst the messengers, who are five. Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, and our beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi afdalus salah wa atammu taslim. So naturally, the reasonable assumption would be that there would be no one more knowledgeable than a prophet. So Sayyidina Musa's response was that he was not aware of anyone of greater knowledge on earth than him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him on this journey. And that journey serves as a lesson till the end of times. It serves as a lesson till the end of time for everyone. So he headed forth. Now, it's who was the person he headed forth to? This is one of the things that we will look at in our look at these verses. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The verses begin, right, from verse number 60 of Surah al-Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verses 60 to 62.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال موسى لفتاه لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبا فلما بلغا مجمع بينهما نسيا حوتهما فاتخذ سبيله في البحر سربا فلما جاوزا قال لفتاه آتنا غداءنا لقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and remember when Moses said to his young assistant, I will never give up until I reach the junction of the two seas, even if I travel for ages. But when they finally reached the point where the seas met, they forgot their fish, and it made its way into the sea, slipping away wondrously. When they had passed further, he said to his assistant, bring us our meal. We have certainly been exhausted by today's journey. So this is an example of the ellipsis in the Quran as well, right? There's much here that is unstated. There's much here that is unstated, because this begins with Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and his young assistant already on this journey. Right? It doesn't tell us the background and what happened, partly because the background doesn't relate directly to. Why would the background not mention? One, because it directly doesn't relate to the guidance. There's also another wisdom, which is, what is the role of a prophet? What's the role of a prophet? يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, right? If you see the roles of prophet of our beloved Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the Quran, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. He recites to them Allah's verses. That's transmitting revelation. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and He purifies them. And that is the purpose of revelation, which is to make good one's relationship with God. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and He teaches them the book. And He teaches them the book, which is beyond transmitting the book, right? Beyond transmitting the book, He teaches them the book, which is to how you understand the Quran. وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and He teaches them wisdom, which is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but that is also how to live revelation. Right? So transmitting revelation, then the purpose of revelation, the understanding of revelation, and then how do you live it? That is the wisdom. So the Prophet ﷺ gave that context, right? That why are they on this journey? Because Sayyidina Musa was asked this question, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him on this journey. Now on this journey, we understand that it's a long journey. It's a long journey. And you have to keep in mind that they're journeying in lands that we know to be hot lands, right? The lands of the greater Levant, right? These are hot lands. And they're traveling, it would appear, largely by foot. So any journey there is going to have its degree of arduousness. But in that, he makes his commitment, right? I will never give up until I reach the junction of the two seas. What is the junction of the two seas? Majma' al-Bahrain. It's a point of great speculation. Why? Because the meeting of the two seas, Majma' al-Bahrain. Now in Arabic, a sea is not, a bahr is not only a sea. Even a great river can be referred to as a bahr. Because a bahr in classical Arabic is a large body of water. A mighty body of water. So from that they differed. Is this somewhere by Sinai, where you have the Red Sea and then the Mediterranean, or some speculate it's the other side. It's around where we have modern day Bahrain, where the Arabian Sea and where you have the Arabian Sea, right, and the Indian Ocean meeting, or the other possibilities, right? We don't know. Right? We don't know. Where exactly was Al-Khadir? We don't know. There have been different speculations, and there have been different postulations of what is the most likely of these possibilities. But this statement of resolve is significant. When they finally reached the point where the seas met, they forgot their fish. Now they had fish with them. So the speculation and what we understand from the interpretations of the Sahaba is that it would be salted fish. Right? Because they were traveling with fish, and this was customary in those lands, that they would, to preserve the fish, they would salt it. And then there was a miracle, and it made its way into the sea, slipping away wondrously. This is a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were told, Sayyidina Musa was told, alayhi salam, that when you reach the right point, you will see a clear sign. This is a clear sign. Their fish slipped out and went into the sea and swam away. And a salted fish doesn't swim away. It's long dead and salted. When they passed further, he said to his assistant, bring us our meal. We have certainly been exhausted by today's journey. So this is the first part, right? And here there's a number of points that bear mention, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So the first, as we approach this story, right? The key lesson in this story is, and that lesson will be coming further down at the culmination, bi'idhnillah, of today's lesson. We'll see the first part of it, which is the great test of knowledge. The great test of knowledge. It begins from before that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to make it known to Sayyidina Musa and to capture the story, right, of the lesson of that وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ, above everyone of knowledge is one more knowing. But here, some people do misportray the story. Why? The prophets are sent as exemplars, right? Are sent as exemplars. But and their stories are mentioned to serve as examples for us, right? But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is correcting them, for example, directly or indirectly, this is not because their actions were not exemplary, but rather to serve as an example for us. And so you have to understand that essential to the reality of the prophets is that they are exemplars for us. Prophets have a rank above all in creation because prophethood, messengerhood is istifa'un ilahi. It's a divine election, right? And it's a rutba. It's a rank. Right? Like someone who lives on the first floor, whatever they do, they're not on the 10th floor, right? It's a different rank, right? So the prophets, and that's the first thing to know about prophets, right? They are the best of creation. They have the highest of human virtues, right? And they're all true, trustworthy. And part of their trustworthiness is they're free of blameworthy traits of character. Right? And that's very important because some people tell this that, well, Sayyidina Musa felt arrogant and conceited, this and that. And some of this, people are influenced, even people who write children's stories, by notions of things that are mentioned in the biblical tradition and this and here and there. And this is incorrect. And this is incorrect. Even some of what's mentioned in the tafsir tradition, it has to be understood in context. Why? Because they mention, it is said, such and such. But as we've taken in previous lessons here on Surah al-Kahf as well, that when the scholars relate from the biblical tradition, they relate it on the assumption that this is what they say, we take from it what is right. And that's critical to appreciate about the story of Sayyidina Musa here, and also about other stories. Right? So prophets are exemplars, and they are shown to us as examples of guidance, right? By their conduct, by their character, by their actions, but also they are examples from Allah's address to them. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them something, He guides them to something that serves as an example, but it's an example from the rank of them being exemplars, right? So we are looking up to them, that even prophets in their rank of being exemplars are servants of Allah. The Lord has a right to command and correct. The servant is a servant in all their states, right? It's also to correct any tendency that some humans may have of deifying the prophets. We affirm without hesitation the rank of the prophets, right? Why? Because they're absolutely above us in rank, in virtue, and in all good qualities. But we take the lesson of humility, but we don't impute the opposite to a prophet, for example, right? And that's very, very important. So Sayyidina Musa, when he answered the question, when he was asked, is there anyone more knowledgeable than you? The answer was correct. Okay? The answer was very correct. Right? Because firstly, he did not say they cannot be. He said that he was not aware of one of greater knowledge. Right? So but also we learn from it that there are realities of knowledge that we may not be aware of. Right? And that's part of why we have humility in our knowledge. A second question arises, who was this youth? Right? Who was this fata? Right? Who was this fata? And it is said that it was Yusha bin Nun. Right? And that he was descended from Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. Right? So it is said. And he's referred to as his. Literally, fata means his youth. Right? And it's well translated here as his young assistant. It was the habit of the Arabs that they would refer to the servant as fata. Right? Because fata is referring to the youth with a praiseworthy quality, which is the chivalry, the vigor, the resolve. So it's a good, it's a quality of praise. But we don't know for sure, right? So that's who was the youth, right? It is said that it was Yusha bin Nun. The third issue, where was the junction of the two seas? And we've addressed, it's not known for sure. The statement of commitment is very important, right? La abrah, I will remain, right? I will never give up. La abrah, I'll remain on this journey until I reach its destination. This is a very important lesson in resolve. Right? إذا عزمت فتوكل على الله. Right? Once you resolve, then place your trust in Allah. What is implicit when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إذا عزمت فتوكل على الله? If you resolve, then place your trust in Allah. There's something implicit, which is, if you resolve, then remain on your resolve and place your trust in Allah. Because it's not just make your resolve and then trust in Allah. There's something implicit, which is if you resolve to do something, do it till it's done while placing your trust in Allah. Why? Because anything worthwhile that you resolve to do is going to have tests, challenges, obstacles, impediments. But fulfill your resolves, right? Fulfill your resolves. And you see this example, right? And this should, and we take the stories of the prophets as reminders, right? That if in life you are tested by anything, a person of Quran should see snapshots of reminders, right? You're on a difficult, you're struggling to understand a particular subject. Recently I've been listening, there's a Jordanian distinguished scholar, used to study with me in Jordan, and I've never taught anyone who's a worst student in one phase of their life. Not a worst student, who was slower in understanding, just didn't understand anything, but he stuck with it. Now he has And mashallah, now he's on the Fatwa Council of Jordan and very accomplished and very sharp. Right? And one of the things we learn, there's numerous lessons, but this lesson of resolve is one of the key lessons from all the stories of the prophets. Right? That they stuck to what they had committed to, what Allah made them responsible for, and what they had committed to do. And this is a beautiful example of that. But also, you need to, part of reflecting on the stories, and they say this is from the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making tajreed at-tafsil, of taking out the details. Why? So you can pause and reflect. Because if all the details are given, you can be a passive reader. It says, and then they went down, and then there was desert, and then there was this, and there wasn't a lot of water. Then what's left for you to reflect upon? Right? Now you don't imagine, you make up imagination, because the point is to reflect on the meaning, even of the context, right? But reflect on that. How difficult would a journey have been of possibly weeks on foot with limited provision, right? But this Majma' al-Bahrain, right? This Majma' al-Bahrain, the meeting of the two oceans, right? Has also been used as a metaphor, right? As a metaphor, right? Of a great destination where openings occur, right? A great meeting point of great matters, right? The meeting point of great openings, right? And there are over a dozen major positions on where exactly it was, and we don't know for sure, right? I will continue on it, even if I have to travel for ages. أو أمضي حقوبا, right? And the word here, حقب, right, refers to long ages, right? Long ages. And حقب, right, can refer to either long time in general, or as related from Ibn Abbas, حقب, right, which is translated here as or have to travel for ages, is have to travel for time itself. Al-Huqub is ad-dahr, is my whole lifetime. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him, go on this journey. So as a servant of God, he's going on the journey, even if I have to travel for time itself. Right? Because the believer doesn't act, right? Abdullah la ya'bud li'illah, right? That the servant of God serves for God, not just for a reason. That, well, I obey because I like praying because it's uplifting. I like doing this because of this. No. One does it for Allah, and if it's worth doing for Allah, it's worth doing without stopping. When they finally reach this point, right? When they finally reached this point, there was this marvelous miracle, right? Of the fish jumping in to the water and swimming away on the sea. So this, of course, was a source of speculation amongst the works of tafsir, that they were traveling by an ocean. So where could they have traveled by the ocean side for at length? And that was source of significant speculation. But we're not going to go into that because it's not decisively established. Some even speculated that was one of the oceans the Nile, right? And the meeting of the oceans would be at the delta of the Nile at the Mediterranean. We don't know. And although this would appear to be after Sayyidina Musa left Egypt, right? So that opinion seems far-fetched. So the reality is we don't know, right? And so this miracle took place, right? And this fish as well, there's speculation what kind of fish it was, but it would appear from what the early Muslims relate that it was salted fish, which would be the customary fish that someone would take on a journey. When they passed further, he said to his assistant, "Bring us our meal." Right? And asking someone, and they reached the point where they forgot their salted fish, and it made its way into the sea. How did they forget their fish? Was it they forgot that they had the fish with them? Right? Because it appears that they had more than enough food, so they could have eaten earlier. They could have rested earlier and eaten earlier. But when you don't have enough provision, then you stretch it out further. Right? However, this salted fish, which Allah made them forget, and who forgot? It would appear that it was the feta, the youth, right? But Sayyidina Musa did not rebuke him for it, right? And that's from adab with the khadim as well, right? That the servant, the assistant, is responsible for the provision. Allah made him forget, right? In this. So they were stretching out their provision, that this salted fish, on the assumption that they didn't have that salted fish in whatever hamper or whatever thing they're traveling with. But then it jumped out from it, right? But Sayyidina Musa did not correct him for it. And this is from the way of the prophets, that they focused on correcting going forward, not back, that why didn't you do such and such? As related from Sayyidina, from our Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidina Anas said, "Ma lamani qat." He never criticized me. He never said, why did you do such and such, and why didn't you do such and such? He focused on what needed to be done next. That was from the raising up of the prophets. So rather he asked, bring us our meal. We have certainly been exhausted on our long journey. And the humanity of the prophets, right, needs to be understood, right? The prophets have human qualities, right? But those human qualities does not mean that they're merely human. A prophet, the first thing to know about a prophet is that they are exemplars, right? What makes a prophet is that they've been granted revelation. A messenger has been granted revelation and been granted the responsibility of conveying that message. So they're incomparably better than any other human being, right? However, it is from great mercy that Allah has sent humans as prophets. So the humanity of the prophets is not negated. From the qualities that are possible for the prophets is that they be characterized by all human attributes that do not go against the responsibility or rank of prophethood. So prophets tired. Right? Prophets had these human qualities, but at the level of their being exemplars, right? And this is an example of that. There's nothing wrong in having someone serve you, but with respect, right? With respect, with humility from the one being served. And you see that with Sayyidina Musa not correcting his servant when he forgot, right? And even in the way he addresses them, right? Bring us our meal, right? Bring us our meal. Yani, right? And that is why? Because from that we see an indication, the ulama of tafsir tell us that they ate together, even though the habit of notables was they would eat separately from those serving them. But the sunnah of prophets, and confirmed by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that not only servants but even slaves, that to clothe them with what you clothe your own family and have them sit with your family when you eat. And the right way of fulfilling that sunnah is that if one has servants, they should sit at one's own table. They should eat from the same food. You clothe them like your family. And the fuqaha deduce from that if you have servants that live with you, you educate their children as you educate your own children. That is the optimal sunnah, right? And in many parts of the Muslim world, for example, this is a bad habit that people don't uphold, right? And if you are a religious believer and you are in a situation where, and we have many listeners from, from many countries where people, it is customary for those whom Allah has granted wealth, or even some means, even moderate, that they have those who come to them for service, etc. Even if someone comes to your house, for a few hours to clean or whatever, that if you're having tea, have them sit down, have tea with you, within the bounds of appropriateness, of course, right? And this idea, well, the servants eat the scraps, for example, or other things. There's food for the household and food for the servants. That is contrary to sunnah. That you will spoil them, whatever. That's not correct. We uphold the sunnah with consideration of custom. We don't say, okay, I'll follow the sunnah, but leave it for customs. Right? Some people, what they do, they follow customs and try to take from the sunnah. No. As believers, our foundation is the sunnah. And then we consider customs and embrace the good of them. Right? And very often these customs are means of us following the sunnah. Right? Like, how do you honor the guest? It would be different in different cultures. Right? If you went over to someone's house and they kissed your cheeks when you entered, would you find that a bit strange? Yeah, most people would find that quite strange. In some cultures, that would be the norm. So, right? So this is, bring us our meal, غداءنا, right? Right? We have certainly been exhausted in today's journey. Recognition of difficulty is not complaint. Right? We have certainly been exhausted by today's journey. Recognition. There's a difference between emotion and, the believer is a whole being. right? So we don't negate our emotions. You feel tired, you feel exhausted, you affirm these human qualities. That in no way should affect one's contentment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one's sabr, one's steadfastness, right? And so on. And this is very important because sometimes people get religious, they say, no, I have to be patient, so they deny their human emotions. And that erodes their ability to be patient, right? We affirm our emotions, but we can both have our emotional weakness and our spiritual strength, right? So he's recognizing we got exhausted. That's an emotional, you feel, it's a feeling, it's an emotion, and it's a physical reality. So you can affirm that dimension of your humanness, while what's the core of your being? It's your spirit, it's your heart and your mind and your soul, which is turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, then they discussed what just had happened.
قال أرأيت إذ أوينا إلى الصخرة فإني نسيت الحوت وما أنسانيه إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا قال ذلك ما كنا نبغ فارتدا على آثارهما قصصا.
So he replied, do you remember when we rested by the rock? That is when I forgot to fish. None made me forget to remember this except Shaitan. And the fish made its way into the sea miraculously. Musa responded, that is exactly what we were looking for. So they returned, retracing their footsteps. So there's a few interesting things here, right? This idea of iwa has come before, right? Of taking shelter, right? Where has it come before? Story of al-Kahf. Right? And that taking shelter, right? Here it's translated, إِذْ أَوَيْنَا إِلَى الصَّخْرَةِ إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ. Iwa is, taking shelter, rest, but from that you have protection, support. But the reason this iwa, this shelter, protection, rest is blessed, it was done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether it was the cave or resting by the rock, because a rock gives you shade, right? That if you on the side of a large rock, there'll be shade, it'll block the wind, etc. Right? And that the ulama mentioned that anything where you take a worldly means for the sake of Allah, it will be blessed. Okay. And he admits that's when I forgot my fish. I forgot the fish. Right? So he admits this. None made me forget it except Allah. Except the shaitan. Afwan, astaghfirullah. Okay. The ulama of tafsir say, why did he forget? And why did the feta forget the fish? Because he was presumably hungry too. Right? And he says, none made me forget it except the shaitan. Right? So Imam al-Alusi summarizes a lot of the discussions in his marvelous tafsir. He says that it may have been because on a long journey, what do you think about? Right? So he says, he may have been busied by the thought of family and leaving his homeland and other things. So from that thought of the fish slipped him by. Right? Slipped him by. Because that's the nature of a travel. Just imagine if you're driving on a long journey. What do you typically think about? Right? But in that, right, is also one of the ways the shaitan makes us forget. Right? When we are drifting in the planes of our thoughts, right, the shaitan doesn't run advertising campaigns. Do this. The shaitan frequently, the thoughts of the shaitan, that's why he's called waswas. Right? He's a slinkering whisperer. Right? He can be very indirect. You're already thinking in something, he'll just give you a prodding thought in a particular direction. Right? And I was only made to forget by the shaitan, where the shaitan himself has no capacity over the human being. Right? He can only give thoughts. Now, another of the interpretations that the ulama of tafsir mention relate to the miracle of the fish. And he saw a miracle, which is a fish. So what made him not pay attention to that miracle? Why would someone not notice a miracle? But what about the presence of Sayyidina Musa would make him forget the miracle? So they mention, right, that Sayyidina Musa, that Yusha bin Nun, right, Sayyidina Musa's assistant, had been seeing so many miracles from Sayyidina Musa, right, which is the nature of Allah, of the divine concern for the prophets, that He grants them support. بِالْمُعْجِزَاتِ أُيِّدُوا تَكَرُّمًا, right? With miracles they were supported as an honoring. That in comparison to this, the fish jumping into the ocean and swimming away wasn't a big deal. Right? Right? And but Sayyidina Musa did not rebuke him. Right? Sayyidina Musa did not rebuke him. And this is very important to also be aware of, right? That be wary of what slips in to the stories of the prophets from people retelling them. And also, of course, here it's very important to note, there's classical consensus that it is not permitted to depict any of the prophets, right? Because there are many cultures that had traditions of theatrical storytelling, etc. It is not permitted to depict a prophet, even if done correctly. Even if done correctly. Correctly meaning that we tell their story in a sound manner. It is a major sin. It's less grave to go and drink or commit sins than do something that contravenes your aqeedah, right? Because sins related to our belief are more grave than sins related to our practice. So it's a grave sin. It's not an innocent thing. Well, I'm watching it critically. if you want to know something critically, read a couple of reviews and say, A'udhu Billah. Right? So it is not permitted to go and see a movie about Sayyidina Adam or Sayyidina Nuh or Sayyidina Musa or Sayyidina Isa. Right? Right? If you want to see, well, firstly, curiosity not only killed the cat, it misguided most. Right? And curiosity is from the is the devil's workshop, right? If you're curious, okay, what does this depiction of Sayyidina Musa have to do? Read a few reviews, find out. And most of these, and I have seen none of them, but if you read the reviews of them, these depictions not only are conditioned by biblical narratives that are deeply problematic, but they superimpose onto them this notion of this modern and postmodern notion of man as fallen. There's no notion of there being virtue and virtuous beings, perfected beings, despite their humanity, right? That the man has fallen and all are merely fallen beings, right? Mired in the mud of humanness. We don't accept that. Right? Yes, we affirm khususiyya. We affirm that they are special people. And the manifesting in other than prophets of their humanness doesn't negate their being special. لا ينافي إثبات الخصوصية ظهور أوصاف البشرية. The affirmation of electhood, of specialness, is not negated by some manifestation of qualities of humanness. It's very important. So it's really important to notice, however, when one reflects the virtues of the prophets, right? Here, the servant on a tiring journey, right, forgot the food. So they had to delay eating. But Sayyidina Musa just focused on what? This is what we are waiting for. He didn't say, you made me wait. Right? There's no selfish response. There's no rebuking response. So this is what, so they returned their footsteps. He did not rebuke them. Why did you make us walk unnecessarily? عليه الصلاة والسلام وعلى نبينا أفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم. Of course, there are other interpretations of why Yusha bin Nun forgot. Right? Some gave a worldly interpretation. Imam al-Alusi also relates. Some of them said that walking with a prophet, right, said of all his people, Sayyidina Musa chose this fata, right? And who's said to have been descended, if it was Yusha bin Nun, who was descended from Sayyidina, he chose the best possible companion. Right? Prophets are present with God. Right? And he's walking with the Prophet, benefiting not only from his spiritual presence, but also from his guidance, his counsel. So they said, it may have been because he was Sayyidina al-Fata, Yusha bin Nun, the person was immersed in, and he was لِاسْتِغْرَاقِهِ فِي الْإِسْتِبْصَارِ. He was drowned in spiritual reflection. Right? And in that state of presence with God, he forgot this worldly detail. Right? But he considered that a shortcoming because he had been given a responsibility. And Allah knows best. So these are, we've touched upon most of these lessons that the one affected, of course, here, he replied, meaning the servant replied, right? To be very clear. Sayyidina Musa's wise response conveys the humility, the gentleness, right, of one in authority. And he responded in a practical manner, right? And that's how we correct things. That, okay, what do we do next? Right? So they headed on in this marvelous journey. And they reached the فَوَجَدَا عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. You can recite the verse. Just I missed the slide.
فوجدا عبدا من عبادنا آتيناه رحمة من عندنا وعلمناه من لدنا علما.
So they found a servant of our servants that we granted knowledge from ourselves. Right? So they found a servant of our servants. And this is mentioned in a mode that is deliberately opaque. They found a servant of our servants. Right? This indefinite in Arabic, فَوَجَدَ, they found a servant, abdan. Now, they're going to seek him out, right? But it's mentioned in the indefinite to make it consequential. They found the one they were looking for, right? But they found a servant of our servants, right? Abdan min ibadina. Right? They found a servant. This is tafkhim li sha'nihi, but doesn't mention who exactly it was or what's the nature of him being a servant of Allah. So some speculated, and then was al-Khadir a righteous servant of God? Right? Was he a prophet? Right? Some even said, was he a messenger? Right? Now, the speculation that he was a messenger is far-fetched. Most of the argument is between his being a prophet, being a righteous servant, one of the awliya, one of the righteous servants of God, min ibadillahi salihin, or they're a prophet. The argument of al-Khadir being a prophet is that Allah granted him unique knowledge, number one, but number two, more convincingly, that he appeared to be governed by laws other than the law of Moses, which is why Sayyidina Musa, as we'll see in upcoming lessons, corrected him. How can you do this? How can you do that? But we don't know for sure. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not decisively tell us he's one of the prophets. There are 25 individuals mentioned in the Quran explicitly as being prophets. 17 of them are in one set of verses. Tilka hujjatuna. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about, I think, 17 of the prophets there, and there's 8 others that are mentioned elsewhere in the Quran. This is discussed in the books of Islamic beliefs, and we have many courses on that, bifadlillah, at Seekers. Now this servant, of course, the vast majority of the scholars say this was al-Khadir, right? And al-Khadir is written in different ways. It can be al-Khidr or al-Khadir or in other ways. There's a few other opinions that was it Al-Yasa, was it Ilyas? Some said that this was an angel, right? But this is rejected. This is rejected, right? Because there are explicit hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that this servant of the servants of Allah was Al-Khadir. They're speculative opinions because a servant, if you look at the logical possibilities, it could be human or jinn. It could be an angel. It could be some other category of being that we don't know. It's possible, right? But most are that it was Al-Khadir because there are a hadith in Bukhari and elsewhere that affirm it being, that talk about Al-Khadir, and that's the most likely explanation. But a servant of our servants whom we granted knowledge from ourselves. آتَيْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. We granted from ourselves, from our presence, great knowledge. We don't know, and the best thing is to, in things like this, is to consign the matter to Allah. Many of the scholars held that he was likely a prophet, but others said no, he was a righteous servant. Then how do you explain these strange actions? We don't know. One of them is that where they reached, like he was not governed by the law of Moses. Why? Because all prophets were sent to their peoples, except Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who sent lil-alameen, to all the worlds. Right? All other prophets, Sayyidina Musa was sent to Bani Israel. They had gone beyond that. Right? So he was outside, so to speak, the prophetic jurisdiction of Sayyidina Musa. But we don't know. Right? But he was granted this great knowledge. He was acting by divine command. He was acting by divine command, right, on what he was doing, even though it appears to be problematic by the law of Sayyidina Musa. Right? Okay. So then Sayyidina Musa addresses this man, right? Who is Al-Khadir. So he says to him,
قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا.
So Musa said to him, may I follow you, so that you may teach me some of the right guidance you have been taught. He said, you certainly cannot be patient enough with me. And how can you be patient with what is beyond the realm of your knowledge? So, there are many lessons in these verses. The question of Sayyidina Musa, right, tells us of the tremendous humility of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. In all of history, past, present, and future, he is amongst the very best of all human beings. In all of existence, till the time of Sayyidina Musa, there was no one better than Sayyidina Musa. Right? So it's not an easy rank. Right? That there's the 5 ulul azm, the 5 highest prophets, Sayyidina Nuh, Sayyidina Ibrahim, Sayyidina Musa, Sayyidina Isa, and Sayyidina Rasulullah Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Right? The 5 best of creation. The very best of them beyond comparison is our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Sayyidina Musa is of these 5. These are the best of all creation, not just of humans, but of all creation. Higher than the angels. But he has been commanded by his Lord to go and learn from this man. Because what is humility? Right? Humility is not to behold oneself as having some consequence and to behave as if one doesn't. Humility is that one does not behold oneself, one is not attached to one's self before the greatness and glory of God. And because Ibn Ata'illah warns that man athbata لنفسه منزلة ثم نزل عنها فهو المتكبر حقا أو كما قال, the one who affirms a rank for themselves but then steps down from it, they're the truly arrogant. Right? That's a type of false humility. Rather, true humility, the humility of the prophets, is that they did not behold themselves of having any worth or consequence before the greatness of God. But it's very important, however, when we read the stories of the prophets, then when we see the witness of the prophets' humility, their indigence before God, that we not take the wrong message from it, which is that they don't have rank, they don't have worth, they don't have virtue. Why? Because we are witnessing we are seeing one expression of their vertical relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that relationship, they feel they have true humility. They don't see themselves as having any rank or worth before God. So what's the lesson we take from it? We take the lesson of the greatness of their humility. We don't take the lesson that they're worthless. Right? Just as Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, for example, we know Sayyidina Adam committed no sin. He did not disobey God. Right? He did not engage in a sin. Right? But his response to them eating from the tree, رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, we have wronged ourselves. It's not that they committed some transgression or sin. It's looking to the greatness of God and what God greatly deserves. They felt that God deserves better. Right? That's very important to understand. Why? Especially because all classical notions in our tradition of how we understand prophets are premised on الاعتقاد والمحب والتعظيم والتقدير والمحبة. 4 key qualities: absolute belief, absolute reverence, absolute respect, and absolute love. This is how we view the prophets, right? Now, there have been literalist extremes and modernist permutations that have, and reformist tendencies and influence from in the colonial and post-colonial period that shake these 4 qualities, particularly of reverence and respect. But loss of reverence and respect entails loss of belief and loss of love. Right? So, He said, well, I still believe in them. I still love them. If you don't have reverence and respect, how are you seeing them as true exemplars, and how can you truly love them? Right? So this is very, very important. So Sayyidina Musa, you see his absolute humility here. Right? He says, may I follow you provided that you teach me some of what you have been granted of right guidance. Right? And this question is amazing. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah mentions 12 lessons of adab in seeking knowledge from this question alone. 12 lessons of adab from this question alone. And we'll look at these because they contain insights not only for someone who is a student of knowledge, but also for us in how we approach learning the religion. So what are these 12 lessons, these 12 adab contained in these verses on seeking knowledge? Right? Every letter of these verses, of this one verse, contains within it lessons on seeking knowledge. Just by the outward, we're not going into the deeper meanings, just the expression of what the Quranic verse mentions. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam said, هل أتبعك, may I follow you, right? May I follow you. And this is al-istidhan fil ilm, right? That there's an adab of requesting to learn. There's an adab of requesting, right? And that alone is an important may I follow you, right? There's an adab of asking, right? That if you want to benefit from somebody, right, you have to establish a relationship with them, right? Right? May I? And this is often neglected, right? People see it as their right to learn. And while that may be true, right, you have to respect the means. As a result, there's an adab of asking, right, to learn. And very often, and it even goes against common sense, right? That, for example, in our times, people are learning online. Said, oh, Shaykh, I've been studying with you for 4 years. Can you give me ijazah? And you don't know them in any way. Why? Because they've not established that relationship. And even classically, there'd be people who are attending a circle of knowledge. If you can sit at the back, whatever, send the question indirectly. People used to send written questions. The teacher doesn't know you. But you have to, to really benefit, you have to establish a relationship with the teacher. Right? That's the first. هل أتبعك. Right? That's may I. Right? That's the second is he said, he doesn't just say, may I learn from you. What does he say? هل أتبعك, may I follow you. Right? اتباع. Right? May I follow you. And اتباع, what is it? Following, اتباع is not just, following is that you see the one you're learning from as al-muttaba. They're the one followed because they're worthy of following. You define your teacher as worthy of following. You define yourself in the relationship as you follow, right? And you fulfill that connection by actually following. And ittaba'a has these four elements. You see the one being followed as an exemplar, as a muttaba'. You see yourself as the one following. Your commitment is that you will in fact follow, and you will follow the way of the one you have made the commitment to take as the one followed. Right? So these are, so there's the one followed because they're worthy of following, the follower because they're in need of following. There's the act of following, which is you do what the one followed does, and you do it in the way that they do it. هل أتبعك? Right? May I follow you? So that's a major commitment. Right? It's a major commitment. And that's why when both in outward knowledge and in the spiritual tradition, they ascribe students to their teachers, right? That يعني لازم فلان, he kept the company of so-and-so. That he kept the company of so-and-so. And then they learned, right? And then they learned. Because you learn, much of the real learning, even at the level of knowledge, happens not just in class, happens around class by understanding the application of that knowledge, by asking the teacher, observing the responses of the teacher, observing the approach, attitude, and behavioral application of the teacher. Right? So, may I follow you? This is very important. And also tells you which teachers should you study from. Learn from teachers worthy of following. Simple as that. But if you find a teacher worthy of following, then follow them. Follow them. Right? And this has always been the key, one of the keys why people don't successfully learn. Because they do their own thing. Right? If you look at the opening of Imam Zarnuji's work, Ta'lim al-Muta'allim, he said that you see the students seeking knowledge but not attaining. Why? لأنهم أخطأوا الطريق, because they don't follow the right way. وكل من أخطأ الطريق ضل, and anyone who follows the wrong way is lost. So this is a very profound condition. And this is the way of prophetic knowledge. And then the third, على أن تعلمني, right? And this is إثبات شرط التعليم, right? Right? That on condition, right? On condition, right? And Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi and al-Qurtubi and many other Imams of Tafsir point out that ala is used, as the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh mention, ala is used for condition, right? That what comes before it, right? That what comes after is a condition for what's before. I will follow you. Right? So he is making a stipulation. I will follow you. In order that you teach me. Right? So it's almost like a contractual commitment. He's offering to follow. Right? In exchange for being taught. Right? So this is like a contractual commitment. على أن تعلمني, right? On condition that you teach me, right? So I'm not just saying that, I'll try to follow, right? And it expresses resolve, right? That I am making a firm, as if contractual commitment. I will follow you, provided that you teach me, right? And that should be the resolve of the seeker of knowledge. A seeker of knowledge it's not just, there's no merit. It's a type of false humility to say, well, I'll try, let me see. That's not the nature of believers, right? You see, earlier in the story of Sayyidina Musa, I will remain committed until I reach my destination, even if I have to spend a lifetime journeying, right? So this ala is very significant, right? That's the third lesson. So that it's a condition and commitment. The fourth is ala an tu'allimani, that you teach me, right? Ala an tu'allimani, so that you teach me, right? So this affirms the rank of the teacher, who is the one who is being taken as exemplar and one followed, right? There's no real knowledge unless one has that commitment of following and listening to one's teacher, whether it be in the sciences of religious guidance, the sciences of Islam, or it be in the spiritual path. That's why Al-Ghawth Abu Madian, what does he say in one of his hikam? He says, إِنَّمَا مُنِعُ الْوُصُولِ لِتَضْيِيعِهِمُ الْأُصُولِ وَتَرْكِهِمُ الْإِقْتِدَاءَ بِدَلِيلٍ. They were only prevented from ever attaining because they squandered the foundational principles and they left following a guide. And that applies in the spiritual path, but also applies in knowledge. People study fiqh. Okay, so what are you doing these days? I'm doing these things. They don't even nominally consult their teachers, let alone actually follow. Right? They have their own theory of how they'll do things and they never attain. Or they never truly attain. A tree uncultivated may still bear fruit if it survives, but it won't bear fruit like a properly cultivated tree. Right? So that's the fourth, affirming the rank of the teacher. And ala an tu'allimani, that's the condition. You teach me, I will follow. Right? So it affirms the rank of the teacher. The fifth, it affirms a respect of the position of the teacher as not just teaching, but one worthy of following, of worthy of committing to. Right? And by this, there's an implication. If you define the teacher as being that exemplar, worthy of following, worthy of taking from, what are you affirming about yourself? That's the sixth. It's affirmation of oneself as a student and as a follower. What am I? I'm a follower. And a beautiful example that I saw of this, one of the most remarkable of teachers that I have met. When I first met him in 1997 in Damascus, behind Sharia Baghdad, in an old Beit Arabi. It was very small. It was presumably part of a larger house that had been broken up. It was 2 floors, but there's only one room on the first floor, one room on the second floor, one room on the ground floor, one room on the first floor. But there's a third room, which was built between the ground floor and the first floor. It was like a hangover room that was they built in, overlooking the courtyard. Anyways, it's kind of scary, small room. And 3 of the very distinguished scholars of our times were at that time young scholars completing their studies. I studied with two of the three. So Sheikh Muhammad Qaylish was being introduced by Sheikh Mu'min, first time I was meeting him. So Sheikh Muhammad Qaylish said, let me introduce myself. And he defined himself as, I'm a student of knowledge. I have studied this subject with this person, this subject with this person, this subject with this person. And I strive to follow them. 10 years later, right? Now a very accomplished scholar in Aleppo, Sheikh Muhammad Qaylish was visiting Jordan, and we had a majlis with scholars and students of knowledge at my residence in Amman. And I began introducing him. He stopped me and said, I'm here, let me introduce myself. And he used exactly the same expression as he did 10 years ago as a young scholar. That I'm a student, I took Aqidah from so-and-so, fiqh from so-and-so, hadith from so-and-so, and the spiritual path from so-and-so, the core Islamic sciences. About 11 years later, we're sitting in Istanbul, in the Fatih district, at a mahad, in a meeting of scholars who were teaching through Seekers Arabiya. And everyone introduced himself. Sheikh Muhammad Qaylish was sitting to my left, and he's the last person to introduce himself. And how does he introduce himself? He smiles. And maybe he remembered the same. He now, in his late 40s, he still introduced himself in exactly the same way as he did when we first met at that time 22 years ago. Right? And that is the nature of prophetic scholarship. Right? That it is based on following, right? Not of independence. Right? So affirming of oneself as a student. The seventh of the adab, right, is mimma ulimta, some of what you have been taught. Mimma ulimt. The min, right, mimma ulimt affirms humility with respect to what you're seeking, but a recognition of the vastness of knowledge, also recognizing that the one you're learning from has great knowledge. Mimma ulimt. The min here, from, is a partitive min. Min is tab'idiyya, right? Partitive. The ma, some of what? The ma is lil'umum, is general. Some of the vast knowledge that you have been taught. But in that, there's a type of tawassul. How? Right? Because it's a respectful reminder to the teacher of what? That the knowledge that you have is a gift from Allah. Right? Now, of course, with respect to prophets have been taught directly by Allah. Right? Sayyidina al-Khadir, even if we don't affirm he's a prophet, his knowledge is direct from Allah. But all knowledge comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but even if it were from a worldly means, right? Through study, it has been granted by Allah. So it's a gift and a trust. Right? So it's mimma ulimt, of what you were taught. Right? So the eighth is a reminder of the blessing, right, of what you were taught. Right? So it affirms the vastness of knowledge in general and the vastness of what the person you're studying from. From that, of course, the number 7, you'd also learn from people who have expertise, right? Who have mastery of that subject. People you can look up to. If someone barely knows more than you, why would you study with them? Learn from people of mastery. There's numerous secondary lessons in all of this, but the 8th is a reminder of blessings to the teacher, but with adab, right? Because knowledge is a gift and a trust. You are making a commitment that I will fulfill the trust of this knowledge. Right? Imam al-Shafi'i went to Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, one of the greatest of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and asked to borrow some of his books. And Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan didn't know who this man was, so he told him to go away, right? That I don't have time for you. So Imam Shafi'i wrote lines of poetry to him. إِنَّ الْعِلْمَ لَيَمْنَعُ أَهْلَهُ أَن يَمْنَعُوهُ أَهْلَهُ. Knowledge prevents its people from preventing it from its people. That I am worthy of this knowledge. But not worthy through arrogation, but worthy through commitment and follow through. Right? Right? So it's a reminder of the blessing and trust that they're taught, and that I will fulfill this trust. A ninth is the humility. That I am seeking a little of what you have to offer, right? Seeing your humility, your neediness, that I really don't have anything. Because a full cup cannot be filled. A full cup cannot be filled. Some people come, they want to learn. And they have, well, these days I've been doing this, I've been doing this, I've been doing this, I've been doing this, and all this thing. And what happens? If you already know, then what can I teach you? Right? They're not willing to listen, to follow. They say, well, let's see what the teacher has to share. Then that's a transactional relationship. That's a consumerist relationship. It's not a relationship of learning. A 10th lesson is مِمَّا عُلِمْتَ رُشْدًا, of what you have been taught of guidance. Right? And رُشْدًا أي عِلْمًا ذا رُشْد, knowledge that is characterized by being right guidance. And rushd is isabatul khair, is that which causes you to attain the good. Right? Right? So rushd can be seen as a synonym of hidayah, of guidance, but really rushd is a subset of guidance. Why? Because guidance is broad. Rushd is you're guided to the right, to what is right, in the right way, in a manner that enables you to attain what is right. Right? So guidance is to show the way, but the way to the right. But rushd is to be guided to what's right in the right way, in a manner that enables you to actually attain it. Right? So it's like, guidance. You ask, what's the way to the coffee shop? You say that way. But rushd would be when you're shown not only how the direction, but how do you get there, what to order, and how to drink it. Like it's the complete package. It'll get you to the thing desired in the way that is of good for you. So you're not just seeking knowledge as information. مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ رُشْدًا, of what you have been taught of right guidance. This is beneficial knowledge, which is عِلْمُ مَا يُقَرِّبُ إِلَى اللَّهِ, knowledge of that which draws one closer to Allah. عِلْمُ طَرِيقِ الْآخِرَةِ, knowledge of the path to Allah. عِلْمُ تَزْكِيَةِ النَّفْسِ مِنَ الرَّذَائِلِ بِالتَّحَلِّي بِالْفَضَائِلِ, the knowledge of that which rids oneself of blameworthy qualities and to acquire praiseworthy qualities. Knowledge that increases one in one's consciousness of Allah. That it enables us to acquire those states and characteristics and conduct beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Right? And that's rushd. Right? Rushd. So that's the knowledge that we're seeking. We're not seeking curiosity, right? We are not seeking curiosity. We're seeking right guidance. So when you ask, like when you go to a course catalog and you say, okay, what should I learn? Don't learn out of curiosity. Think about these adab, review them. This is the kind of adab, but always ask, who are these teachers? Are they worthy of learning from? Right? And the ulama through the ages have said, this should be the commitment in seeking knowledge, and this is what you seek. Right? So we seek rushd. Right? And an 11th lesson is, it's in the indefinite, right? مِمَّا عُلِّمْتَ رُشْدًا, of great right guidance, right? That you approach knowledge with a deep sense of veneration, right? It's as if it's saying, and it's hard to convey that in English, that of what you have been granted of great knowledge, right? What you have been granted of great guidance, right? And that conveys the indefinite in Arabic, مِمَّا عُلِمْتَ رُشْدًا, of great right guidance. Why is it great? Because of your great need for it, and it being great in the sight of God. Right? مِمَّا عُلِمْتَ رُشْدًا. Right? That's 11th, to have that deep sense of respect and veneration for knowledge. That's why it's related from one of the great early Hanafis, Imam al-Karhi, وَاللَّهِ مَا نِلْنَا هَذَا الْعِلْمَ إِلَّا بِالتَّعْظِيمِ. By Allah, we did not attain this knowledge except through deep respect and veneration, ta'zeem. And he explains one expression of his respect, says, فَوَاللَّهِ مَا أَخَذْتُ الْكَاغِدَ قَطْ إِلَّا عَنْ طَهَارَةٍ. Said, by Allah, I never touched blank paper except in a state of ritual purity. Now that it's not obligatory nor even intrinsically recommended that you don't touch paper without tahara. But this is the expression of respect. Imam Abu Hanifa, out of gratitude to his teacher Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, never in his life, after studying with Hammad, his main teacher of hundreds of teachers he had, he never extended his feet anywhere towards the direction of his teacher's house. That's not expected religiously. But one has that deep sense of respect. And finally, there's an expression of resolve. There's an expression in all of this of resolve. You have made a condition, and we explained that. There are many other lessons here, right? Right? There are many other lessons here as well, but we just wanted to touch on some of them. And then the verses continue with the response of Sayyidina al-Khadir, who said, you certainly cannot be patient enough with me. How can you be patient with what is beyond your realm of knowledge? Right? And the basis of al-Khadir's negation is he knows that Sayyidina Musa is bound by the law of Moses. So it's not that Musa is being impatient. Right? It's not that Sayyidina Musa is being impatient. Sayyidina Musa is a messenger. He is the one who has been granted a message and a law from God, and he is bound to act accordingly. Sayyidina al-Khadir has been commanded by Allah to act in a particular way. So al-Khadir knows that he by his moral responsibility will not be able to defer, even though Sayyidina Musa, in obeying the command of God, has been commanded to follow him. Too. But he is following him conditioned by the Shara. So Sayyidina Musa, every refusal to follow was because he is bound by Shar'ullah, right? He's not bound by his teacher, quote unquote, in this scenario, but by the sacred law, the Sharia, right? And naturally, there's an insight as well. A person naturally opposes something that they don't understand. There's a human wisdom in this as well, right? That if you don't understand something, naturally they say al-mar'u aduwwu ma jahil. In our context, Sayyidina Musa, of course, it's not because he doesn't understand it, but because he is bound by his law that he has been granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this, of course, raises the issue of who was Al-Khadir, and we'll talk a little further on that. There's many other questions regarding Al-Khadir that we'll unpack as we go through the story of Al-Khadir in upcoming classes. Amongst them, is Al-Khadir still alive? And that's been an issue of great speculation in Islamic history as well. So we'll stop there. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على ختم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Any questions online?
Does learning from parents count for anything?
Does learning from parents? Of course, parents are one's first teachers, right? And that is from the duty of parents, because the parents teach their children both formally but by their examples, right? By their examples. And one of the tricks of the shaitan, and also one of the things that is in the water of modern society, is this notion of disrespect for our parents, that we notice that, in 20 years that you're with your parents, you realize, oh, my parents were overbearing, unreasonable. You notice the faults. They didn't teach me enough about my fiqh, but who taught you how to pray? Where did you first pray? Who taught you the Fatiha? Oh, they didn't teach me the Fatiha correctly. But they taught you the Fatiha. Were it not for them, you wouldn't even be a believer. Right? So it's very important we apply this to our teacher, to our parents, insofar that we see the good that they have taught us. Right? And it's a reminder for parents that you bear a great amana. Right? That you must be the first teacher for your parents, but bear that trust fully.
Is it also possible for us to be alive for a very long time?
Is it possible for us to be alive for a very long time? It's possible. It's unlikely, because we know from various hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that the lifetimes of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ are brief in contrast with some of the past peoples. Right? Now, modern knowledge hasn't, we don't know, right? Because the history of the past peoples is lost in the midst of history, right? And we don't know exactly how and why, but we know with certitude that there are of the past prophets who lived a long, long time. And that's from the wisdoms. Nobody knows where the graves of those people are, right? That's from the ibtila of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hikmah of Allah. But we believe in the truth of the Quran, and we know that Sayyidina Musa, for example, Sayyidina Nuh lived an extraordinarily long time. When exactly was the flood of Moses? We don't know. Or the flood of Noah? We don't know. But the adab of making dua is to make dua for what's beneficial for you. And it's not from adab to ask for the extraordinary. Just like placing demands on Allah. Oh Allah, make me live 180 years. Now, it's possible, but what's considered al-mumtani' adatan, that which normally cannot happen, one doesn't ask for. Even if it's possible. How many billionaires are there on earth? Right? So let's say if you're living in the slums of Cape Town, it's bad adab to say, oh Allah, make me a multi-billionaire. If you mean it as that's exactly what I want. If you mean it in a general sense, grant me great wealth, right? It's allowed, but the very least is you should have a matter of consigning the outcomes of what you're asking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The better way is to ask for the good, right? Ask for the good, right? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله